We are swiftly approaching the end of book 1 of The Fellowship of the Ring. A Knife in the Dark is the chapter we're on today, and it's a crazy chapter because it is one of the first times where Frodo sees danger and does not come away unscathed. We are starting to realize that our heroes may be a little bit more at peril than we might have thought originally. This is not your uncle's Hobbit, where Bilbo escapes pretty much without a scratch throughout most of the story, except for a few of his feet here being singed by a dragon. But before we delve into kind of some of the more important thematic elements I want to talk about in the story, I do want to draw your attention to the fact that throughout the story, particularly in this chapter as an example, you'll see that Tolkien is extremely careful with dates. Every single leg of their journey, every single day is marked with a date. For example, on this day, it says it was the night of the 5th of October and they were 6 days out from Bree. Now, if you go to the appendices in the final book, The Return of the King, there is literally a timeline that says where the Fellowship is at any given point in the story. Now, if you've not read the book before, do not go to these appendices because you will be quickly spoiled with this timeline because it goes, to the end of the book and beyond. But if you've seen the movies or read the books, using this timeline to enrich your reading experience is extremely rewarding because you can see the Fellowship walked this many miles, or this many leagues, as Tolkien would likely say, across this many days, through this terrain. These are the obstacles they encountered, and we just really Tolkien's way of adding a layer of realism to his story by saying, realistically, this is what this type of people across this type of terrain with these types of obstacles, could come across, and how long they would need to stop and rest for, and things like that. So again, it's just another example of how Tolkien just kind of added that layer of richness and realism to his world. The other thing I want to talk about in the video today is the place where they're staying. It's the hill with that broken kind of foundation on top of it. It is the Watchtower of Aman-Sul called Weathertop. Now, if you'll remember in the last video, we talked about the northern kingdom of Arnor, which was destroyed many generations ago. And this particular tower was very important to that land because it housed what we call a palantir. Now, if you've read the books and seen the movies, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't yet, we'll get to that, in the next few chapters. I can't remember if this comes up in book 1 or book 2 of Lord of the Rings. It might not come up until Two Towers. But basically, a palantir is a seeing stone. It's a way to kind of see different parts of Middle-earth and connect to other people who have these seeing stones. It's kind of like a old, fantasy-esque version of kind of like a telephone-ish thing, but there's a lot more to it that I want to talk about if you haven't read it yet. But the Northern Kingdom had one, and the Southern Kingdom had one, and a few other places had one. Do become important later in the story, but the story never really touches too much about this one that the Northern Kingdom had, but it was housed in this particular spot. The Palantir were housed in places of importance where it was maybe hard for the enemy to breach, or where there was some important person dwelling there, so they could instantly connect with each other across Middle-earth. So this Palantir has long since been lost since the fall of the Kingdom of Arnor, and it does not play into the story at all. But just to kind of show you a little bit of the importance of why this tower is here in the first place. Returning to one of my favorite topics, and that is a theme, we see here that hope wanes a bit. They stood for a while on the hilltop, near its southward edge. In that lonely place, Frodo for the first time fully realized his homelessness and danger. He wished bitterly that his fortune had left him in the quiet and beloved Shire. He stared down at that hateful road, leading back westward to his home. We see here that the hobbits have gone through some crazy endeavors, from the old forest and nearly being consumed by trees, to being nearly destroyed by barrow wights, to being chased relentlessly by black riders, to just having kind of that dark experience where they're being sought after in Bree, in the Prancing Pony, to now literally being surrounded by the ring wraiths, by the Nazgul, by the servants of the enemy, and having this reminder that this westward road that Frodo traveled on and avoided for a long time because of the Black Riders, just there, and we see that hope starts to drop, and they're being surrounded, and they don't know what the outcome is going to be. But then we have this. As night fell, and the light of the fire began to shine out brightly, he, Strider, began to tell them tales to keep their minds from fear. He knew many histories and legends of long ago, of elves and men, and the good and evil deeds of the elder days. Strider goes on to say these tales may lift their hearts and their spirits. And I find that just such a telling part of character in whole and humanity in whole. I mean, that's why we read stories. We read stories to be entertained, sure, but we read stories to encourage us, to inspire us, to kind of keep us going when things get dark. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in my own life and in lives of, people that I know that, when things get hard and rough and they just want to kind of, forget about the world a little bit, they'll say, well, let's read a book or let's watch a movie. And do some people argue, is that a form of escapism? Sure, and for some people it is. I'm not going to argue the pros and cons of that right now. But I would argue this, though, that it does help us experience different worlds and different circumstances and scenarios and live vicariously through other characters so that we can get some hope and we can see other characters and say, just like Frodo, just like Sam, just like Strider, encountering these dark moments and coming through even when things seemed hopeless, maybe I can do that too. Tolkien understands that. Tolkien, who fought in World War I at the Battle of the Somme, one of the most deadly battles of the war, and really spent his time in the trenches. He spent his time when he wasn't dealing with trench fever and just the awfulness of that whole situation. Writing his own story. I'm sure they didn't have a lot of reading material there in the trenches, so he wrote the beginnings of what became the Silmarillion, a work that he worked on for years and years, in which Lord of the Rings directly stems from. Tolkien consumed himself with story in order to get through those dark moments. And that's what the Hobbits are doing here. They are ironically listening to those same stories that Tolkien was writing in the trenches of World War I. So I don't ever want to kind of get too much into our own world during these videos. I want to kind of keep them more Middle Earth based. But I just want to encourage you guys a little bit and just say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with going into the world of stories when you do feel down and discouraged and depressed and all those things. Stories are not the end all. They're not going to save our lives or anything like that, but they can give us some courage to kind of keep going on and just see the friends that we have in our stories, the Frodos, the Sams, the Merrys, the Pippins, the Striders, and know that other characters have gone through the same thing, or maybe not the same thing, but something similar, and maybe we can too. So I'll leave you with that note today, especially because this particular chapter ends on a little bit of a darker note. But I will see you tomorrow with this video, Flight to the Ford, which wraps up Book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring.